Welcome back once again for part 2 now of the logo part of this series of the AI recreating the NHL, 32 teams in 32 different cities with all new names and all new logos. This is the back half of that logo portion with the next 16 teams. If you somehow didn't watch part 1 of the series in general where it decided the cities and team names, that will be linked below, as well as part 1 here of the logo portion of the series. Anyway, let's just jump right back into the logos that, again, like I said in part 1, are generated by the Bing Image AI since it was free and easy to use. That's powered by Dolly 3 if I'm not mistaken. Either way, we left off, if you don't remember, with the Nashville Crescendo that did have an original color scheme and a pretty original and unique name. With that though, it is time to transition away from a team with a unique color scheme and name to a team that very much doesn't. It is the New York Guardians, as the colors that ChatGPT gave were navy blue primary, silver secondary, and then Gotham black as the third. So it did set up for potentially some pretty cool and original looking logos, but in the end we end up right back with dark blue, lighter blue, and silver or white. But generic branding with the colors and name aside, with what it was given, outside of ignoring the Gotham black part of it, the logos don't look terrible. They're pretty well designed, outside of maybe the one in the bottom left where all I can see is Gus. I don't know who Gus is, but clearly he's an important part of this franchise. The other three, though, I think are all usable, or at least aspects of them are. The one in the upper left, I'm not really sure what's going on. You can definitely see a Y there as maybe the center of the face or a nose of some sort of guardian creature. Maybe you slap an N instead of whatever that blue thing is above the Y, and you've got NY, so you got something going there. I don't mind the one in the upper right outside of the text part, New York Guardian, so if you just chop that off. I do like the kind of golem looking thing. It would be better if that face was a little bit bigger and there's less just random lines going on all around it. So maybe blow up that face a little bit and chop off the text and you've got a decent logo there. In the end though, as is, I'm probably picking the one in the bottom right. You've got a building, a big Y, some stars, and actually kind of what looks like a building also going down, maybe reflecting out of the water. And again, you've got a pretty clear Y shape there, so if you find a way to work an N in to get the NY, I think this is a pretty decent logo. And while a shield shape is a bit overused in the NHL and maybe a bit boring, I think it does fit the branding of this team as a whole, so I don't mind it, at least here anyway. And then up next we have the Ottawa Legionnaires, who already had a name that's pretty close to the Ottawa Senators, even if it sounds a little cooler. But then they were given pretty much the exact same colors as the Senators. Ottawa red, black, and Legionnaire gold. So in the end, you're left with what you could easily be convinced is a bad AI rebranding of the Senators. And, well, the logos kind of reflect that. You've got old style looking knight helmets in gold, so some Golden Knights looking things there, but not that far off of a Senator or Legionnaire. Medieval type of metal armor. And then whatever the heck is going on in the bottom right, just the most convoluted, abstract looking logo I've seen so far to this point. And there have been a couple of pretty abstract looking ones. But I suppose if I had to pick one of the four for a logo, I would almost certainly go with the one in the upper right. It's way too busy, there's definitely too much going on, and some things that would have to get changed here and there. Plus, the guy's helmet is just way too tall. He's got Peyton Manning forehead going on there for sure. But if you ignore all those things and maybe make a tweak here and there, there's some aspects to like about it. There's the fleur-de-lis that do look pretty nice with the flip-flopped sides of kind of a Maryland state flag type of look. And obviously with it being Eastern Canada, there's some French influence there. Plus you got the hockey stick that's going across on one side and what looks like a hockey puck over the other shoulder. So some definite kind of knight playing hockey type of vibes, and a pretty cool looking shield, again with the nicely designed fleur-de-lis at the bottom. So you know what, I suppose there's enough to like about this logo that we can run with it. After all, the Coyotes have a logo that most people seem to love, and it's very busy. I mean, I actually really love that Coyotes logo, and it's definitely just as busy, if not busier, than this one. With that though, I think we can move on from one of the less coherent sets of logos that we've seen so far to probably the most coherent set of four logos that the AI image generation provided with the Philadelphia Liberty. And sure enough, that's just what we ended up with. Four logos that prominently feature a bell, if not the Liberty Bell. Only one of the four has a clear and obvious crack in the bell, which is a pretty famous part of the Liberty Bell. Even if the one in the bottom right is the one that most looks like what we know as the Liberty Bell minus the crack, it is a pristine Liberty Bell with no cracks, so maybe it's the backside or a fixed version or a pre-crack version of the bell. As for the others, the one in the bottom left I think we can rule out right away. It does pretty prominently, even if it's in the background, feature the Statue of Liberty, which is notably a New York landmark, not a Philadelphia one. Plus you got a skyline in the background that also looks a little bit more New York than Philadelphia, though admittedly, I'm not super familiar with the skyline of Philadelphia. Either way, that one's a little too New York for my taste, and I think anybody in Philadelphia. The one in the upper right, I do like quite a bit, and just from a design perspective would probably be the one I would pick. It is the only one that features the Liberty Bell with a clear crack in it, with some wings slapped onto it, which is always a nice touch, and then some hockey sticks or hockey stick resembling objects crossed behind it, and you've got a pretty nice looking logo. Still, there's something about that logo in the top left that I just absolutely love. The idea of a bird with a bell for a head. It definitely screams freedom or liberty or whatever you want to call it. I think it's a pretty nice looking logo, well designed, even if it doesn't have the crack in the bell that you'd like to see. And the bell's a little bit smaller compared to the big wooden part that holds it up at the top. Either way, there's something about this logo that I really appreciate. And I do have to give bonus points to both of the logos actually here on the left for sticking with the colors that were provided, which was a primary color of Liberty Bronze, then blue, and Freedom White. There was no orange anywhere in there, so I guess that was just added in as inspiration from the Flyers to the logo that's pretty nice in the upper right, though I suppose adding an extra color isn't quite as bad as just ignoring the primary color entirely, like the logo in the bottom right, which has no bronze whatsoever. At the end though, even if that logo in the top right is probably the better one, I'm gonna go with the logo in the top left. You've got the bell-headed eagle and the nice touch at the bottom of Liberty, incorrectly spelled, but a spelling that does fit Philadelphia pretty well, especially Philadelphia sports fans. Staying in Pennsylvania but moving out west to Pittsburgh, up next we have the Pittsburgh Steelhawks, which was the only one to completely ignore the no text part of the prompt and gave 4 logos with text all over them. That having been said, I have to admit that it did come up with some pretty nice looking logos, and although once again it did ignore the colors given to it by ChatGPT a little bit by adding some yellow here and there, I think that was a worthy addition for Pittsburgh sports as a whole, which do tend to go with black and yellow as their colors. Still, ChatGPT did have this as the token black and white team, with the colors of steel gray as a primary, black as the secondary, and then hawk silver as the third, so actually white wasn't even a part of it, it was just black, gray, and shiny gray. Either way, again, I am going to allow the addition of the accents of yellow here and there to these logos, and in fact, I'm going to promote the idea of adding some yellow, even if it's not one of the official colors, to one of the logos that doesn't have it. Because even in spite of all the text on all 4 of these logos, I still think that 3 of them turned out pretty freaking well. In fact, this is one of my favorite logo sets of all of the ones we're going to see in this series, and one of these 3 logos, or one of the 4, but one of the 3 that I think turned out well, the one in the lower left, might just be my favorite logo of all 128 that popped out of the AI generation. And if you take away the background and the text and just have the isolated Steelhawk bird head, it is easily my favorite logo of all of the ones we're going to see. The only other addition that I would make to it, and last change to make this logo perfect and just slap it right on the front of a jersey, would be for Pittsburgh to make the eye of that bird yellow. And then, yeah, you've got pretty much a perfect logo for a team named the Pittsburgh Steelhawks. And for what it's worth, I also really like the logo in the upper left, just maybe more as a shoulder patch. I think if you have that as the shoulder patch, obviously with correct spelling and all that, and maybe make the beak gray and the eye yellow just to match the primary logo with that one in the lower left, taking away the background and adding the yellow eye, I think you've got pretty much a perfect set of logos for this team. In fact, you know what? I'll go ahead and say it. If you make those changes that I said to the lower left logo, I straight up like it better than the Pittsburgh Penguins logo. And I know that's one that a lot of people like, but this is just, I mean, an almost perfectly generated logo by the AI. And again, easily my favorite of any of the ones that's popped out. Let's move on. And we move on to the Portland Timberwolves, who have the 3 colors of primary timber brown, secondary forest green, and tertiary pioneer gold. Again, remembering that this team was also called the Pioneers originally, and I forced ChatGPT to rename either this team or Edmonton, and it chose Portland. So the Timberwolves ended up with the same colors, and I'll admit, I was skeptical giving brown and gold together, but the logos it created are pretty nice. I mean, the one in the upper right does look a little bit more like a national park type of logo in some way rather than a professional sports team. But the other three are all pretty decent and have some redeeming qualities to them. I mean, sure, there are some things to nitpick here and there with them, as has been the case with pretty much all the logos we've seen so far, with maybe the exception of one or two here and there. The one in the top left does have a bit of a angry owl face to it, which would probably have to change to be taken a little bit more seriously. In the end, though, I think the best option is probably to take the wolf head out of the middle of either of the two logos on the bottom. Personally, I'd probably take the one on the bottom right just to stick with the colors provided. But either one would work, and then you could put the whole logo with the text in either square or circle as the shoulder patch, and you got a pretty decent looking jersey with that brown and green color scheme going. Up next, we have the Quebec City Citadel with the colors Citadel Stone Gray, Quebec Blue, and Fortress Gold. And I gotta say, this is another one of those teams that has a really cool sounding name, at least to me anyway, but at the same time has a hard time turning that name into something, especially a logo, that doesn't look AHL, minor league, or even beer league-ish. And I think to some extent there is some of that in just about all four of the logos that were provided by the AI, but at the same time there's aspects of them that I really like. For example, how can you not love a castle as part of a logo like we have in the bottom left? Again, there's an issue with text kind of ruining that logo a bit for me. 3 of the 4 logos do have fleur-de-lis in them, so that's definitely something that I think would pretty much have to be a requirement for a team from Quebec, at least as a part of a jersey, if not in the logo itself. And in that way, I think it might eliminate the one in the upper left. Ultimately, though, because of the sheer busyness and chaos going on with the one in the lower right, ultimately, of the 4 as is, I think the one in the upper right is probably the best of the 4. It doesn't have a castle, which is disappointing, but it has a pretty cool looking and serious knight guy on the front, with a shield that's got blue on one side, gold on the other, so a good balance of colors there. The fleur-de-lis on either side that balance pretty well as well, different colors for each of them, kind of like we saw with the Ottawa Legionnaires and the logo we ended up picking there, only this one is better designed and has a reasonably shaped head on the knight guy. So yeah, ultimately I think I would pick that one of these, even if I would like to see some way of working a castle into the logo. Then we have the Raleigh Redwoods, which, if Redwoods and Raleigh doesn't make sense to you, believe me, it didn't for me either. I explained how we ended up with this name in the previous video, but for the sake of time, we'll just stick with we're pretending this team moved from California and just kept the name and colors, which the colors make sense for a team named the Redwoods, with forest green, or dark forest green, excuse me, being the primary, scarlet red the secondary, and redwood brown the tertiary. So yeah, again, pretty good colors for a team named the Redwoods, and a color scheme that honestly I really like. I know it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea by any means, but for whatever reason, red and green is a color scheme, probably because it's fairly unique in sports. There's a few teams here and there that use it either on occasion or as their primary color scheme. And yeah, I just absolutely love it. I love the Minnesota Wild color scheme and branding in general, so that should tell you everything you need to know. For the Redwoods, though, there's a couple of these logos that I do really like, at least if not as a whole, the direction they're headed in. Probably the one in the bottom left is my favorite idea or concept of a logo, even if there's some things I would change. I don't really know what's going on in the bottom of the logo, but I like that they've got the 3 trees, one that's in nighttime with the green and then daytime with the red, so a nice kind of balance on 2 sides of a logo. Though, even with that being said, I'm not sure how good it would look on the front of a jersey as a primary logo, even with some changes made here and there. I just really like it aesthetically as an image. I suppose probably the better logo would be the one in the top left, or maybe top right. The top right obviously is a bear and has nothing to do with the Redwoods, but it wouldn't be the first time we've seen a bear added into a branding that doesn't mention a bear anywhere. Ultimately, I think I'd probably take that one in the upper left, just get rid of the text, and maybe make it less of a shield-looking thing. And as for the one in the bottom right, the hockey sticks in the middle are a nice touch, and I do think it's pretty well designed. Again, I like the colors, but at the end of the day, it is a little too cartoony, I think, to be a professional sports logo, and fits a little bit more, like we said with that one for the Timberwolves, as like a national park type of thing. With the San Diego Surf, whose colors are ocean blue, sandy beige, and seafoam white, I do think they ended up with some pretty nice logos. The colors for a team in San Diego, I think, could be a little bit more interesting than basically blue, beige, and white, but still, you've got 3 decent looking logos and then just a very nice image. The one in the upper right, it's not a logo in any shape, way, or form. It's way too busy to even be a shoulder patch, but it is a very nice image standalone by itself. So then with the other 3 that we can actually talk about as logos, The one in the bottom right I think there's some elements of it that I do like. At the end of the day, though, it kind of looks like a tsunami hitting a desert island with a couple of palm trees on it, so there are some pretty major aspects of it that I think would need to change to really make it a decent logo, which is more than I can say for the other two on the left-hand side. The one thing I will say that I do like as a small touch design-wise about the one in the lower right is the little bit of that white wave that breaks up the outlined blue border. But again, we are going to stick more on the left side of this with the two logos that I think have a much better chance, at least of these four, of turning into, with some changes, at least a usable logo for the front of a jersey. Now, the one in the top left, if I had to pick one of the four as is to use, is probably the one I would go with. It's still a little bit too busy. There's too many dots all over the place, especially at the top of it. I understand the bottom where it's brown, that's probably supposed to be sand, so some dots here and there make some sense there, but this is just way too busy of a logo to be on the front of a jersey. Now, the Blackhawks get away with a pretty busy logo as well as the Coyotes, so I'm sure you could figure it out, but I think they would have to be cleaned up a little bit to really make it look better. But you make those changes, as well as maybe a few less shades of blue in the waves to simplify things a little bit more, and you've got a pretty decent logo. I think it's well designed and wouldn't look terrible on the front of a jersey, if the jersey around it was designed to complement the logo with some wavy patterns and stripes. That having been said, yeah, not terrible. It is ultimately a cartoony wave, and there have been a couple of teams previously with the Timberwolves and the Redwoods that had cartoony logos that I said were a little too cartoony, but again, this is the San Diego Surf, so you kind of are, you work with what you're given, and I'm sure given professional designers and enough time, they could probably come up with something a lot better than this. They came up with one of the best logos in sports with the Minnesota Wild, as I've mentioned already, so I'm sure there's something there. But as for what we're given with the AI, that's about as good as it gets. Now, the one in the bottom right does also add a wave that's a cartoony wave with a hockey stick, and from a comedic standpoint, I love the idea of a wave playing hockey, but comedy isn't necessarily what you're looking for from a primary logo, so I think we'll stick with the one in the top left here. Now, if you thought we had issues coming up with a good logo for the San Diego Surf, well, it's the same problem, just even more exaggerated with the next team in the San Francisco Bay Storm. Now, they do have more interesting colors, and I say that more visually interesting, even if they're not terribly unique. It's basically the same color scheme as we saw with the LA Celestials, which would be a problem from a branding perspective to have two teams with basically the same exact color scheme in a division. That having been said, the NHL already does that with the Lightning and Leafs, so it's not like it's a deal breaker necessarily. But for the Bay Storm, you've got sky blue primary, golden yellow, which seems redundant, as a secondary, and Bay Breeze gray as the third. So again, it's basically blue, blue, and a couple shades of yellow. And the logos are, well, I don't really know what's going on with any of these. None of them are particularly close to being a usable logo, in my opinion. You've got a water tornado, I guess, going on in the bottom right there, and that's maybe the closest you get to a Bay Storm that makes sense. Still looks like a nice sunny day behind the water tornado, so I don't really know what's going on there. Bit of a skyline. Yeah. Whole lot of I'm not sure what to make of any of this. You at least have the Golden Gate Bridge, or something that resembles the silhouette of the Golden Gate Bridge, in the top left. But yeah, this is one that I think you'd have to take to a designer and come up with something completely new. And unfortunately, I gotta say things don't get much better with the next team in the Seattle Emeralds, which I do think is a better name than the San Francisco Bay Storm, which is just a mouthful. It is also a name that was at least considered or thrown around when they were talking about what names to name the Seattle NHL team. It was never at the top of the list, but usually in the mix for the top 5 or top 10 names. And it does make sense with Seattle being the Emerald City and everything. Plus, from a personal perspective, since I love the color green, there was at least part of me that, I don't know if hoping is the right word, but would have definitely been okay with this being the NHL team name, since it would have guaranteed that green was one of the primary colors. In the end, I love the name Kraken and the branding is fantastic, so while I still would like green to be part of it, I like what they ended up with. Either way, the problem with the Seattle Emeralds, which we're going to see, was always the branding and how to come up with a logo that looks like an emerald and isn't just a rock as the logo. There were some cool ideas that fans had of kind of the top of the Space Needle on the inside of an emerald gem that I think could have worked, just not necessarily fantastic, and definitely would have been as good of a logo as what the Kraken ended up with. So again, I think they went the right direction. And as we see with the logos here, well, yeah, it's just kind of a whole lot of stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, for one, the colors, well, I mean, I don't hate the colors, but I kind of wished it would have just leaned in and gone green, green, and more green. Instead, it went with evergreen green, which is, again, a bit redundant for the primary, then deep blue for the secondary, and then emerald gold for the tertiary, which I was kind of curious to see what the AI was going to do with emerald gold as a color. In the end, it kind of just went with gold. I mean, the one in the lower right, again, for text-wise, going back to that Nashville Crescendo one, does look very nice, and it even spelled Seattle correctly, so that's also a bonus. But again, while it does look emerald and it's got all the colors and there's some good design elements there, I don't really know what that is. It's maybe a leaf or an emerald crystal of some kind. I guess I don't really know what an emerald crystal looks like before it's turned into a gem you would see in the store. So yeah, that's kind of the problem with all of these. You've got kind of a tree-looking thing bursting out of the ocean, I guess, with the lower right, but I don't really know what to make of the rest of that. And then in the upper left, that's clearly more going with the reason that it's the Emerald City and the nature and the greenery around Seattle with some leaves. But yeah, nothing really screams hockey to me, so if I had to pick one of them, I guess I'd probably just go back to the one in the top left, even if it is a bit busy for a primary logo. It at least looks very Seattle as far as the nature all around, with the ocean as the foreground, you got the trees in the background, and then we'll call it the Olympic Mountains in the background, since none of that looks anything like Mount Rainier, which is the most prominent mountain right in the Seattle area. Finally, though, with our next team, we do get back to a team that has a name that lends itself to some decent looking logos, and at least branding that makes some sense and you can see the direction it's headed in, which is more than you can say for certainly the last two teams, but maybe even the last three. That being the St. Louis Archers, who already probably have my favorite of the team names that we got out of the AI from the previous video. And while the color scheme leaves something to be desired, it's one that we've become pretty familiar with in this AI league, with Arch Silver, Navy Blue, and Arrowhead Gold. So basically your blue, blue, and gold and silver type of color scheme that we've seen a number of times already. Either way, the logos that it led to are fantastic. One in particular is one of my favorite logos that we've seen so far. Three of them are maybe a bit ruined by too much text. Again, the AI having trouble with the no text part of the logo request. Either way, there's some elements of those ones I like. The one in the upper left, you've got a pretty good logo there, even if Archers is just slapped over the middle of it. The one in the bottom left, I don't really know what's going on. There's some nice design elements there, but nothing that screams Archers to me. And then the bottom right, again, some nice design elements. You can definitely see the arrows and Archer theme, but it's the one in the top right that, for whatever reason, I absolutely love. Design-wise, it's a beautiful logo with the two shades of a number of things that gives the logo depth. You've got the arrow through the middle of it, and you can clearly see both an A shape for Archers and the arch, even if I would probably switch the order of those things. I'd probably have the arch be a little bit more prominent, so it's having the nod to the St. Louis Arch, and turn it silver rather than golden at the bottom, and then have the A be gold and represent the Archers in the middle of the arch. Now, this next one we probably don't have to spend too much time on, since the logos that it came up with for this city are very similar to the logo or logos we've seen from the team that already exists in this city in the NHL. That being the Tampa Bay Thunder, which is obviously very close to the Tampa Bay Lightning, so it makes sense that the logos then look pretty similar to Lightning logos, with the obvious exception of certainly more vibrant colors. The colors it was given were Thunderstorm Gray primary, Electric Blue secondary, which gives that brighter blue, and then Lightning White as a tertiary. Now, as we can see, it did also add in the image AI, that is. A lot of dark blue is a pretty prominent part of these logos, which I suppose makes some sense, not only from a design perspective, but because of the Tampa Bay Lightning and proximity name-wise to the Tampa Bay Thunder here. But at the same time, it did definitely use that electric, vibrant blue in this color scheme, which, even though it is, again, blue, blue, and a couple shades of white, like we've seen a number of times with the more winter-themed Frosty teams, it does make this one stand out a little bit from those, which I can appreciate. And while they are similar looking logos to what we've seen in the past, maybe with the exception of whatever's going on in the bottom right there with that guy creeping behind the lightning bolt, I like all these logos. The one in the top right is probably the one I would select. The background of it is a little bit too busy, so you'd probably have to simplify that to have it as a primary logo and what you put on the front of a jersey. But there's definitely some promise there, and it's basically just a slightly better version, in my opinion, without text, of a Lightning logo that we have seen in the past. Other than that, we have the top left, which does look a lot like, again, another Tampa Bay Lightning logo, just with the hockey stick handle on the lightning bolt. And then the bottom left, which, I mean, again, it doesn't look that different from the other two, just a little bit more chaotic of a lightning bolt and a pretty chonky lightning bolt on top of it. So yeah, probably not the one I would pick. In the end, I'd go with a simplified version of the background, but generally the same logo that we see there in the top right. Oh, and since I did mention it earlier with one of the San Diego logos, I did want to point out, again, that similar design feature of that logo in the top right, where you've got that little edge of the lightning bolt at the very top that breaks up with the blue line, breaking up the white circle around the outside. Again, similar design element that adds a little bit of extra character to the logo, and it's not just a lightning bolt in a circle. It kind of comes out of the circle and, yeah, kind of brings the whole logo together. And the good news is that with the electric blue in these Tampa Bay logos, mercifully, the Tampa Bay team and the Toronto team in this league do look distinctly different, as up next we have the Toronto Tundra. And I gotta say, again, one of my favorite sets of 4 logos. All 4 of these, I think you could turn into a pretty good primary logo. Maybe the top left one is the only one that would look better as a shoulder patch than a primary logo, but there's a lot to like about everything there is here. The 3 colors given were ice blue primary, white as a secondary, and then maple leaf red as the third. And while it did take the maple leaf red part of it pretty literally with 3 of the 4 of these, the maple leaf again in that top left one, a little bit more of the blue colors. It's just a icy maple leaf, which is pretty cool by itself and certainly a very hockey looking thing. At the same time, the other 3 logos are what really do it for me. The one in the top right is certainly the most simple of them, and if you make the bottom part of that, where the maple leaf kind of gets cut in half, look a little bit more like a skate, I think you're in business with that one. The one in the bottom right is basically a Yeti with a maple leaf in front of it, and very well designed on top of that, so there's a lot to like about that one. Maybe a little bit too busy for a primary logo. You'd probably want to stick with one thing or the other and not a Yeti and a maple leaf, both as kind of primary eye-catching parts of the logo. Still, a lot of design elements to like about that one. And then, even with the text, probably the best logo here of the 4. And I would probably find a way to get rid of the text, but still, that one in the bottom left is a fantastic logo. Everything from the hockey sticks going out to the outside that break up the maple leaf as the clear, prominent part, even though it's in the background, with then an icy mountain and tundra in the foreground. I don't really know how many mountains there are around Toronto, but as far as a team called the Tundra, really anywhere in Canada, it'd probably fit a little bit better in Edmonton since it's farther north. At the same time, the maple leaf, as far as hockey is concerned, is a little bit more synonymous with Toronto, even though the maple leaf, especially a red one, is synonymous with all of Canada because of the flag. Either way, it definitely works, and this logo is fantastic design in my eyes. Yeah, the hockey sticks breaking up that maple leaf and making the maple leaf almost a part of that icy mountain. Just a fantastic logo from start to finish, and especially if you were to take away the text around the outside, or obviously at least spell it correctly, this is one that again could go right onto the front of a jersey, in my opinion. Though, again, I will say I like the cleanliness of that logo in the top right at the same time, and from a simplicity standpoint, it's probably the best of the logos, certainly the most modern of these 4. Staying in Canada, but going all the way out west to Vancouver, up next we have the Vancouver Titans, who, again, did not get the most original name. It's a fairly generic name that really could have been used for any one of the cities, so in that way it's a little disappointing that Vancouver didn't get a somewhat more applicable just to them unique name. Either way, they did get pretty good colors and a pretty unique color scheme, at least with this league anyway. Now, ChatGPT tried to give them basically Canuck colors with forest green, silver, and Pacific blue, but even with relatively simple colors to go off of, the image AI took some liberties with these colors and either changed up the blue or the green, or mixed the blue and the green to get teal. Either way, it led to some pretty interesting logos where, aside from the consistent issues in spelling Titans correctly in some pretty hilarious ways, when you look at the top left, there's some decent design elements in here. I don't necessarily see anything that screams Titans other than the one in the top right where you've basically got a stone face with some sort of emerald crown on top of him. Again, definitely not the best logo of the ones we have. The one in the bottom left is probably my favorite as is of the logos provided. The text is a little bit distracting. Still, it has some of those good Northwest elements, the pine trees, the mountains, and some water at the bottom. The one on the bottom right has a lot of those same elements, plus has no text. It's just the thing above what I could say that's a whale tail that's coming out of the water, so that I can make sense of. I just don't know what that beehive thing is above the whale tail, and that's kind of throwing me off. So if I had to pick one of the four, even though it doesn't really have Titans anywhere in it, other than actually spelling it correctly, I will go with the one in the bottom left, because the one in the top right, while it has something that could be a Titan, it's, again, just kind of a generic stone face with a weird looking crown thing. So, yeah, we'll go bottom left. And thankfully with our next team, we continued the trend, actually really with both of our last two teams, so we finished strong here with these last three with unique color schemes. Something that has to be said, the AI had some trouble coming up with different color schemes that weren't just blue, blue, and white, or blue, blue, and some form of yellow. Either way, with the Washington Monuments, we do get one that we have not seen to this point. And that's thanks in large part to the primary color of burgundy for the monuments, secondary color white, and tertiary monument gray. So you've got a pretty classic color scheme here, one that we have seen in the NHL, but a very long time ago with the Montreal Maroons. It's not a color scheme that we've really ever seen since. The closest we have is the Avalanche, with kind of a purplish burgundy sort of color that they go with there as their primary. Another unique color scheme, so you've got to love the Avalanche for that. And maybe as a thank you to ChatGPT for not just giving it, once again, the same color scheme over and over and over and over and over again for the millionth time, it took this new color scheme and absolutely ran away with it. Only in one instance straying a little bit for a little flavor of a different color mixed in, but even there still kind of stuck to the retro theme that the maroon and white definitely lends itself to. As for the logos themselves though, once again, it pretty much ignored the no text part and put text in all four of these logos, which for me is a bit of a problem. Still, I think they're pretty nice looking logos, even if it maybe does have to be said with the Washington Monument, and understandably so, showing up prominently in at least three of these logos. If the monument itself doesn't already look maybe a little bit phallic, throwing some giant wings and feathers behind it certainly doesn't help. And even if that isn't an issue, putting hockey pucks or whatever those circles are at the bottom of it and then hockey sticks coming out of it, yeah, that is a bit of an issue. So ultimately, I gotta say, of the four logos, while I do like wings coming off of just about anything, because I mean I like birds and wings tend to look good in logos, in this instance, I'm actually going to go with the logo that adds a little bit of that brown color, the one in the bottom left, because, well, I mean, it's not the Washington Monument, which it does seem a bit of a shame to have a team called the Washington Monuments and not have the Washington Monument on the logo. Having the Capitol building instead, I don't know, that logo just looks a little bit more classic, and yeah, I don't know, there's something about it, the Capitol building or whatever old building that is, the stars and the stripes, it just screams Washington to me and definitely fits an older looking hockey team. And besides, I definitely couldn't go with the logo in the bottom right, since that's basically just the Washington Wonder Women, so yeah, we'll stick with the bottom left. And finally, with our last team, we have the Winnipeg Northern Lights, which is a bit of a mouthful of a team name, but the Northern Lights is a cool idea for a team name, and turns out has some pretty good logo ideas. I was kind of hoping that this would finally be the team that would mix in some purple, but none of the teams end up doing that. Once again, another fake NHL taking after the real NHL and just not having any purple whatsoever. I mean, the Kings do have purple in their history, which they call back to every now and then, but for whatever reason, it's a color that continues to get completely neglected by even fake professional hockey. Either way, the colors for the North Stars are polar blue, which makes sense, Aurora green, again, makes some sense, and frost white. And the logos it came up with are all pretty decent, even if not necessarily the most coherent, but again, we are kind of working with another one of these names in the Northern Lights that, while a cool name in concept, does have some issues with obvious directions with branding. Certainly the logos, it doesn't really have any obvious things you can do with a logo. Maybe the one I would have liked to see it try would be the Northern Lights in the shape of a W, just turned more into a logo and simplified a bit. Still, you can get the gradient going there and have that W shape for Winnipeg. In the end, we don't really get that with any of these, but the color scheme is pretty nice, at least as a standalone color scheme, and definitely fits the name Northern Lights perfectly well. And I gotta say, the two at the bottom do look very similar to each other. One of them looks a little bit more like a tropical ocean at nighttime than the Northern Lights. So in the end, I'm probably gonna go with the one in the upper right. It kind of looks like some sort of ancient monument to the Northern Lights, with the Northern Lights kind of arcing over it, and you got some mountains or trees in the background and maybe an ocean in the foreground. The one in the upper left looks a little bit too much like a blue flame, so I don't really know how that goes with Northern Lights. Either way, not terrible logos, but nothing that really screams hockey or Northern Lights, and I don't know how it would look on the front of a jersey. And so finally, with that, we have reached the end of the logo portions of this AI generated league. We will still have another one of these with the jerseys, and we will probably have to use our imaginations a little bit with some of those jerseys, since the logos on the front of the jerseys aren't going to match the ones we see here, since the AI can't replicate these logos onto a jersey for whatever reason, or at least I'm not good enough at the AI to get it to do that. So when we see those, we'll look at those logos with a bit of grain of salt and try to imagine the logos we liked from this on those jerseys with the striping and color schemes and all that. Anyway, this has already been a lot of recording for this video, so I imagine it's been a pretty long one. Either way, thank you for sticking with me through this. I hope you enjoyed at least some of these, and at least like the exercise of coming up with this fun AI generation, not only with the team names, but now with the logos as well. Let me know down in the comment section which logos were your favorite, which ones you particularly found yourself attached to, if there's any that, like that one for the Pittsburgh Steelhawks, you maybe even liked better than whatever NHL logo that city already has, or maybe some of the cities that didn't already exist, if there's a logo that you think would look really good in today's NHL. Other than that though, if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, which if you made it to this point, I'd have to think you did at least at some point like or enjoy some part of this video. If that was the case, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below that help support the channel. Like and subscribe, of course. I'd appreciate you using them. And until next time, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Emeralds. Though, maybe brand yourself a little bit better.